There are surprises that arrive from outside. The screen at the back of the stage, the phone call, the person who appears when no person was expected, the surprise that comes in from somewhere else and lands in the room where you are standing. Those are good surprises. This is a different story. This is a story about a surprise that had been inside the room the entire time, that had arrived on the stage at the beginning of the afternoon along with everyone else, that had been standing at the podium beside a woman named Christine for 2 full rounds of Family Feud before it was given, in the specific, deliberate. I have been waiting for the right moment way of a man who had been planning this since before the application was submitted, and who had chosen this room specifically because this room was the largest room available, and because what he had to say required a large room, and because the specific, public, 300 people and cameras quality of this large room was not incidental to the giving, but was the point of it. His name was Walter. He was 57 years old. He had been married to Christine for 32 years. He had something to say that he had been trying to say for 3 years, and that had not found its form in the smaller rooms, and that he had decided, after 3 years of the smaller rooms failing, required the largest room he could find. He had submitted the Family Feud application himself, and then he had told Christine about it, and Christine had agreed to come, and neither Christine nor any other member of the family had known what Walter had planned for round 3. Steve Harvey had known. Steve Harvey had gotten a letter, an actual letter, handwritten, mailed through the production company's general mail from Walter 6 weeks before the taping, and Steve Harvey had read it and had called Walter, and Walter had explained, and Steve Harvey had said yes, and here they all were, on a Tuesday. And in the 3rd round, Steve Harvey stopped the game and looked at Walter and said, "Sir, I believe you have something you want to say." And Walter said yes. And what Walter said produced a silence in Steve Harvey that was its own kind of stopping. The specific, full, mouth open, but no sound quality of a man who had been in enough rooms to know when a room had just received something that the room did not have a response for because the response was not the point, and the point was what had just been said, and the room needed to be with what had been said for a moment before anything else happened. And then Steve Harvey spoke. And what he said was not about the game, and was not about Walter and Christine, and was only partly about love. It was about what it meant to say the true thing in the largest room you could find, and about why the size of the room mattered, and about what it said about the person who chose the large room. Hit that like button and subscribe right now before we go any further, because this channel is here for exactly these stories, for the men who find the large room, and we come back with one every single week. Now let us talk about Walter. Walter Reeves was 57 years old and was a recently retired high school football coach from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, who had spent 31 years on sidelines and in film rooms and in the specific, consequential, relationship-intensive world of high school football coaching, which was not, as the people who had not been in it sometimes believed, primarily about football. It was primarily about young men, about their capacity to be more than they thought they were, and about the specific, patient, daily work of a coach who understood this, and who organized his coaching around the helping of young men find out what they were capable of. Walter had been that kind of coach. He had been, by the account of his former players and his assistant coaches and the parents of the boys who had been through his program, one of the coaches, the specific, rare, this was the one kind, who had understood that the game was the occasion and the young men were the subject, and who had kept this understanding front and center for 31 years, and whose players had gone on to be the specific, pointed at evidence of this understanding, which was the evidence of young men who had come through his program, and who were, in the various rooms they had entered since, exactly the kind of people he had spent 31 years trying to produce. He was warm in the specific, direct, coach's warmth, not the sentimental kind, but the kind that was organized around believing in a person before the person believed in themselves, and around being right about the believing. He had retired 6 months ago and was, in the specific post-retirement quality of someone who had been organized around a purpose for 31 years, and who was finding the recalibration difficult in the process of figuring out what came next. What had come next first was this, which he had been planning for 3 years. Christine Reeves was 55, and was a high school art teacher in Winston-Salem who had been teaching for 27 years, and who had, from 27 years of teaching teenagers to see, the specific, warm, comprehensive, what is actually their intelligence of someone who had spent her career teaching people the difference between looking and seeing. She was direct and observant and warm in the unguarded, I am not performing this way of someone for whom the authentic was simply how she operated, because performing required attention that she needed for other things, and because she had been in enough rooms to know that the authentic was always more useful than the performance. She had been married to Walter for 32 years. She had known in those 32 years who she had married had known the coach's quality, the warmth that was not sentimental, the believing in people quality, and had found in the knowing a particular, specific kind of being with someone that was its own thing, and that she had not had language for, and that she had been trying to have language for, and that Walter, apparently, had found the language for 3 years ago, and had been trying to find the right room for ever since. Their daughter Maya, 28, was a graphic designer who had grown up in the specific football season organized household of a coach's family, and who had the specific coach's kid quality of someone who had grown up in a world that was organized around a team, and who brought this quality to everything, who thought in terms of what the team needed, and who was good at organizing the available resources toward the needed outcome. She was here because she was the Reeves family's person, and because Walter had told her privately what he was planning, and because she had said she was going to be in the room for it if it was the last thing she did. Walter's younger brother Leon, 54, was a retired police officer who had the warm, direct, still in good shape quality of someone who had spent 30 years in physically demanding work, and who had the long view. I have seen everything quality that came with that. And Christine's best friend of 25 years, Patris, 53, who was an elementary school principal with the warm, organized, runs complicated rooms quality of someone who managed complicated rooms for a living, and who had been beside Christine for 25 years, and who had been told about Walter's plan by Maya, and who had been, in the weeks since learning about it, in the warm, organized, forward-moving quality of someone who knew what was coming, and who was going to be present for it with everything she had. Walter had written the letter to Steve Harvey's production company 6 weeks before the taping. He had written it because he had decided that a phone call was not sufficient and that the letter was the form the request deserved. He had written it on paper, in his handwriting, which was the handwriting of a coach who had been drawing plays and writing notes and filling out compliance paperwork for 31 years, and that was therefore organized and clear. He had described what he wanted: to stop the game in the third round with Steve Harvey's help, and to say something to Christine that he had been trying to say for 3 years and that had not found its form in the smaller rooms. He had not written what the something was. He had written, "I want to say it to her in the largest room I can find, and I think your show is the largest room I can access, and I am asking for your help finding it." He had mailed it and had waited. Steve Harvey had called. Walter had explained. Steve Harvey had said yes. The opposing family was the Thomas family from Charlotte, warm, well-prepared, entirely decent, and going to have the specific experience of being the uncomplicated team on an afternoon where the main event was at the other podium, which they received with the warmth and grace that entirely decent people received such things. The pregame. Steve Harvey moved through both families with the customary warmth and arrived at Christine with the genuine, curious attention he brought to people who had something real to say. Asked about the art teaching. She described it with the warm, direct, 27-year quality of someone who had found the work exactly right for who she was. "I teach people to see, not to look to see." He said, "What is the difference?" She said, "Looking is what happens when your eyes are open. Seeing is what happens when you decide to notice." He said, "You teach the deciding to notice." She said, "I teach the deciding to notice." He said, "For 27 years." She said, "Every student comes in looking. My job is to get them to start seeing." He said, "Do they all get there?" She said, "They all get somewhere." He said, "That sounds like enough." She said, "It is enough." He received this. He filed it. He noted it for later because later it was going to be relevant. He asked Walter about himself. Walter described the 31 years of coaching with the warm, organized, what it actually was quality of a coach who had learned to describe the work accurately. "I spent 31 years helping young men find out what they were capable of." He said, "Was the football part important?" Walter said, "The football part was the tool." He said, "The finding out what they were capable of part was the work." Steve Harvey said, "And you have been doing that for 31 years. Walter said, "Yes." Steve Harvey said, "Retired now." Walter said, 6 months. Steve Harvey said, "How is that?" Walter said in the plain, direct voice of someone reporting accurately, "It is the strangest 6 months of my life." He said, "I have been a coach for 31 years and now I am not a coach and I do not yet know who I am when I am not a coach." He said it without self-pity as an accurate description of where he was. Steve Harvey said, "That sounds like you are figuring something out." Walter said, "Yes." He said, "I have been figuring things out." He said, "I think I figured out one thing 3 years ago and I have been waiting for the right room to say it." Steve Harvey looked at him. He looked at Christine. He looked at Walter. He said, We will get to that. He said it in the warm, I know what is happening and it is going to happen voice, and then he moved on to the game. The first 2 rounds were warm and excellent. Both families played with the specific, forward-moving, competitive quality of 2 well-matched Family Feud teams. Christine was extraordinary. The art teachers, what is actually their intelligence applied to survey questions with the warm, decided to notice quality that 27 years of teaching the deciding had produced. She was right at the rate of someone who had been teaching people to see clearly for 27 years, and who had, from the teaching, the clearest possible model of what the general population said and thought and valued when they were actually looking at something rather than just looking at it. Walter was organized and right with the coaches practical. What does the situation require quality? Maya was warm and sharp. Leon was direct and steady. Patris had the elementary school principal's comprehensive, complex rooms managed quality applied to survey questions with the quick, organized accuracy of someone who had been managing what happened in rooms for a long time and who was very good at it. 3rd round. Second question. The score was close and the game was good and the room had the warm, competitive. Both families are enjoying this quality. Steve Harvey moved toward the podium for the 3rd question. He stopped. He stopped in the specific, deliberate, I have decided to do this now way that was different from the stopping that happened when something unplanned required addressing. He said, I need to stop the game for a moment. He said it in the organizing, I have something to do voice. He looked at Walter. He said, Sir, I believe you have something you want to say. Walter said, Yes. He said it in the quiet, composed, I have been waiting for this voice of a man who had been waiting for 3 years and who was now in the room and who was ready. Steve Harvey said, The floor is yours. Walter turned to Christine. He turned with the full, deliberate, I am going to say this correctly quality of a man who had been thinking about this for 3 years and who was now saying it in the room he had chosen to say it in. He said, Christine. He said it in the voice that was not the public voice and was not the in front of everyone voice. It was the specific, private, 32-year voice that was only for her, and he was using it in front of 300 people because the 300 people were the point. He said, I have been trying to say something to you for 3 years. I have tried it in the car and at the dinner table and on the back porch, and none of those rooms were big enough. He said, I need a big room. I need you to hear this in a room that confirms it by the fact that it is in it. I need 300 people and Steve Harvey to be the evidence that I mean it. He said it in the organized, this is why I chose this room voice. He said, because I am a coach and a coach knows that the room you say the important thing in is part of the important thing. The room is the commitment. A locker room speech means something different than a hallway comment. The room is part of what is said. Christine was looking at him. She was in the specific, full attention, what is happening quality of a woman who had been beside this man for 32 years and who had learned to pay the specific art teachers decided to notice kind of attention to what he said, and who was paying it now completely. She said nothing. She was receiving. Walter said, I want to tell you something about the last 3 years. He said, when I retired 6 months ago, everyone asked me how I felt about leaving coaching. And I told them the truth, which was that the 31 years were complete and that I was ready for what came next. But there is something I have not told anyone yet. He paused. He said, the thing I have been most afraid of since I retired is not losing the coaching. The thing I have been most afraid of is not being enough for you without the coaching. He said it in the quiet, plain, I am going to say the true thing voice. For 32 years I have been a coach. That has been who I was in every room. And the coaching gave me a shape, a purpose that was visible, and I was afraid, I have been afraid for 3 years since I knew the retirement was coming, that when the shape was gone there would not be enough left to be worth what you have given this marriage. He said, I was afraid that without the coaching I would not be enough. He said it plainly, without performance, as the honest account of what he had been carrying. He said, and then I retired 6 months ago. And I have been figuring out who I am without the coaching, and I am figuring it out, Christine. I am finding out what is there when the shape is gone. He said, and what I have found in 6 months of figuring it out is you. He said it simply. He said, every morning when I wake up without the coaching, you are the first thing that makes sense, not the thing I fall back on. The thing that was always the thing and that I could see more clearly when the coaching was not in the way of seeing it. He said, 32 years, and I can see it now without the coaching in the way more clearly than I have seen anything in 31 years of coaching. He said, I wanted to say it in a big room because I want you to know that I am not saying it because I am lost. I am saying it because I am finding out what I am, and what I am is the person who chose you 32 years ago and who would choose you in every room and in every shape and with or without the coaching. He said, I want the room to know that. Because the room knowing it means it is in the record and things in the record are true in a way that the car and the dinner table and the back porch cannot make them true. He said, I love you, Christine, I always have, and now that the coaching is out of the way I can see how much. He said, I wanted you to see me see it, in the largest room I could find. He stopped. He had said it. He had said it in the room he had chosen. He was standing at the podium with the full, completed, I have said the true thing quality of a man who had been carrying something for 3 years, and who had set it down in a large room in front of everyone, and who was standing in the setting down. Christine was looking at him. She had been looking at him through all of it with the full, decided to notice art teacher's entire attention quality. She was in the specific, full, this is the thing I have been looking at for 32 years quality of a woman who knew a person and who was watching that person do something that was entirely, unmistakably themselves. The coach who believed in people before they believed in themselves, doing it now for himself, saying the thing he had been afraid to say in the largest room he could find because the large room was the commitment. She was in it, in front of everyone, not managing it, in it. Steve Harvey was at the center of the stage. He was in the specific, still mouth slightly open. The room needs a moment quality of a man who had known what was coming and who had been prepared, and who was finding that being prepared was not the same as being ready for the actual thing, because the actual thing was more than the preparation could have contained. He was quiet, not performing the quiet in it. He was in it for a moment that was visible and that the room held with him. Then he said, I need to say something. He said it in the quiet, this is what I have found voice. He said, this man wrote me a letter, an actual letter, handwritten, he mailed it. He said it in the organizing, the room should know this voice. He wrote, I want to say something to my wife in the largest room I can access, and I think your show is the largest room, and I am asking for your help finding it. He said, I have been doing this show for 14 years. Nobody has ever asked for my help finding the room before. He said, and he told me why he needed the large room. He said, the room is the commitment. A locker room speech means something different than a hallway comment. The room is part of what is said. He said, I am a coach too. I coached this show for 14 years, and I want to tell you something about what he just did. He said it in the direct, this is what I see voice. He did not say he loves her because he is retired and he is afraid and he needed reassurance. He said he loves her because 6 months of figuring out who he is without the coaching has told him, more clearly than 31 years of coaching, who the first thing is, who the thing that makes sense is. He looked at Walter. He said, that is not a man who is lost. He said, that is a man who just found out exactly who he is. He said it with the warm, direct, entirely certain quality of a man who had been given an accurate description of a thing and who was confirming the accuracy. He retired from coaching and he found out he is the person who chose you 32 years ago and who would choose you in every shape. He said, that is what 6 months of looking has produced. He said, your husband sees clearly. He said it to Christine. He always did. He just had 31 years of coaching in the way of seeing how clearly. He can see it now, he said, and he put it in a room with 300 people and cameras so that the seeing is in the record. He said, the seeing is in the record. Christine said, and she said it in the warm, direct, this is simply true voice that was hers, she said. He has always known who I am. He just needed a big room to say it back. The room gave them everything it had, Steve Harvey said. She said, he has always known who I am. He just needed a big room to say it back. He said it to the room and to the cameras. He said, that is the most complete description of a 32-year marriage that I have heard in my 14 years of this show. He said, and now we are going to play some Family Feud. He said it in the warm, forward-moving, the game has been waiting voice. He said it with the specific, slightly undone, glad I was in this room quality of a man who had read a letter 6 weeks ago and who was glad he had said yes. The game resumed, and what it revealed was a team playing together with the specific, present. Hands are free quality of 2 people who had just said and received the important thing, and who were now doing the next thing with the weight of the important thing making the doing fuller. Christine played with the warm, decided to notice, all the attention available quality of someone who was not dividing her attention between the game and the thing she had just received, because the receiving was complete and her hands were free. Walter played with the organized, I know what the team needs now quality of a coach who had just said the thing in the room and who was now doing the next thing, which was winning the game for his wife, which he understood as the available expression of what he had just said. Maya played with the specific. I knew this was coming, and the knowing made it no less good quality of a daughter who had been told what was planned and who had been in the room for it, and who was channeling everything she felt about it into being excellent at Family Feud. Leon was warm and right. Patris was precise and right, an occasional warm glance at Christine, checking the 25-year friend's peripheral I am here quality. The Reeves family won the main game. They won it with the warm, organized. The coach knew what the team needed quality of a family that had a person who could see clearly. Fast money. Christine walked to the podium. She walked to it with the 27-year teacher's walk, the walk that was organized around the deciding to notice, that was upright and forward-facing and entirely present in the room it was in, because that was what the deciding to notice required. Steve Harvey looked at her from across the stage. He said, 27 years of teaching people to see, 32 years of being with a man who can see you. He looked at her, he said. He put it in the record says, in every room, in every shape, with or without the coaching. He paused. Let's see what 32 years of being seen looks like in 20 seconds. Christine said, start the clock. He hit the button. Christine Reeves answered 5 Family Feud survey questions in 20 seconds with the warm, precise, 27-year accumulated intelligence of an art teacher who had spent her career teaching people to see what was actually there rather than what they expected to find. Who had been the decided to notice person in every room she had entered, and who applied this to the survey with the warm, unhurried, entirely accurate quality of someone who had been practicing the deciding for 27 years and who was practicing it now. She was right. 4 answers were number 1. Her 5th answer, delivered at 16 seconds in Christine's voice, the warm, direct, I have noticed what is their voice, was number 1. Walter scored 83 points in the second seat. He gave his 5 answers in the organized, the coach delivers under pressure way, the practical, what does the situation need quality that 31 years of coaching had built in him and that produced, in survey questions, the direct, right at a high rate accuracy of someone who had been reading situations accurately for a long time. Combined total, 278 points, $20,000. Steve Harvey brought the check. He carried it to the center of the stage and stood in front of Walter and Christine together and held it between them and said, a man wrote me a letter 6 weeks ago. He said, I need the largest room I can find. He said, the room is part of the commitment. He said, he found the room. He held the check between them. He said, $20,000 for the largest room available and for the record. He said, the record says, in every room, in every shape, with or without the coaching, you are the first thing that makes sense. He said, that is now in the record. He gave the check to both of them, held it between both of their hands simultaneously. He said, the record has it. Whatever comes next, the retirement and the figuring out and the new shape of things, the record has it. He said, the room was found. Christine looked at the check. She looked at Walter. She said in the warm, direct, I am going to say the true thing voice that was always hers. I knew. She said it in the specific, this is simply accurate voice. I always knew, she said, but I needed you to find the room. She said, I am glad you found it. She paused. She said, I am glad you wrote the letter. She looked at Steve Harvey. Thank you for reading it. Steve Harvey said, thank you for sending him. Said it with the warm, direct, entirely sincere quality of someone who was giving credit where the credit was. He looked at Walter. He said, you found it. Walter said, you helped. Steve Harvey said, that is what the largest room is for. He said it in the quiet, final, this is what I believe voice. The largest room is for the things that are big enough to need it. When you find a thing that needs the largest room, you find the largest room. He said, you found it. He said, the room said yes. The episode aired 6 weeks later. The clip spread in the specific, wide, personal, multiple direction way of things that named more than one true thing simultaneously. The first was the letter, the actual, handwritten, mailed through the production company letter, which spread in the way that concrete, physical, this is what he did gestures spread when the gesture was proportionate to what was being said. Several people wrote about the handwriting. Several wrote about the mailing. Several said he could have emailed. He wrote a letter. He mailed it. He understood that the form of the request was part of the request. Several said, that is what it looks like when someone takes something seriously. The second was the reason for the large room. The room is the commitment. A locker room speech means something different than a hallway comment. The room is part of what is said, which spread in the specific, named it way of something that people had understood but had not had language for. Several people said, I have said the important thing in the hallway. I have said it at the dinner table. I understand now why it has not landed the way I needed it to. The room matters. The room is part of what is said. Several said they were going to find a larger room for the thing they had been saying in the hallway. The third was Christine's line. He has always known who I am. He just needed a big room to say it back, which traveled in the specific. This is the sentence way of sentences that were both simple and complete. Several people said it was the most economical description of what a long marriage was that they had ever heard. Several people sent it to their partner. Several said their partner sent it to them. And the fourth was Walter's description of what retirement had revealed. Every morning when I wake up without the coaching, you are the first thing that makes sense, which spread among people who had undergone some version of the transition he had undergone. The end of the role that had organized the self and the figuring out of who remained, and the finding of what was first. Several people who had retired or changed careers or lost a role that had been defining shared it with the specific, recognizing this named it quality of people watching someone else describe an experience they had been inside. Several said, "I have been afraid that without the thing I was organized around, there would not be enough left." And then they watched Walter say, "And I found out there was you." Several wrote, "That is the right answer." Several wrote, "I hope it is also my answer." Walter finished figuring out who he was without the coaching. Not all at once. It was, as retirement tended to be, the work of time and of the specific, daily, what is available now quality of someone who had been organized around a purpose and who was finding the new organization. He started volunteering as an assistant coach at the local community college, 2 afternoons a week, which was not the same as coaching, but was the available form of it, and which turned out to be its own thing, with its own specific quality of young men figuring out what they were capable of. He found out he was still the person who was good at that. He also found out in the months after the taping that the first thing that made sense every morning was still Christine, and that the finding out was continuous and not a single event, and that the continuity was itself the thing, the waking up every day and finding out again in the available light what was first. He wrote it down once on a piece of paper that he left on the kitchen table for Christine to find. He wrote, "Still first." She kept the paper. She put it somewhere she would see it. She sees it every morning. There are surprises that arrive from outside, and there are surprises that have been in the room the entire time. Walter's surprise had been standing at the podium beside Christine for 2 full rounds before it was given, and the giving was in the room he had chosen, and the room was large, and the record has it. The room is the commitment. He found the room. The room said yes, still first. Every morning, the record has it. If this story reached you, if you have something you have been saying in the hallway that needs a larger room, or if you are figuring out who you are without the thing that organized you and are wondering what is first, share this today. Leave a comment below and tell us what you are carrying from this story, because this community carries things together, and your voice here matters. And subscribe right now if you are not already with us, because every single week we come back with stories exactly like this one. Stories about the letters mailed to production companies. Stories about the rooms that are the commitment. And stories about the coach who retired and woke up every morning and found out in the available light what was first. We will see you in the next one.